Hello, I'm Ben Wattenberg. The fall of the Soviet Union left America as the world's only superpower. What should America do with its newfound status? Turn inward or try to lead the world and set the global agenda through peaceful means when possible and military might if necessary? Joining us to sort through the conflict and the consensus are Joshua Muravchik, resident scholar at the American Enterprise Institute and author of The Imperative of American Leadership, A Challenge to Neo-Isolationism. Ambassador Richard Holbrooke, former Assistant Secretary of State for European and Canadian Affairs and Chief Negotiator of the Dayton Peace Accord for Bosnia. Owen Harries, editor of the journal The National Interest and editor of 2 compilation volumes, America's Purpose and In the National Interest. And Charles William Maynes, editor of the journal Foreign Policy and co-editor of U.S. Foreign Policy and the United Nations System. The topic before this House: the Cold War is over. What do we do now? This week on Think Tank. For almost 50 years, American foreign policy was organized around the concepts of containing Soviet expansion, averting nuclear war, and exporting democracy. With the Cold War over, things are not so coherent. Many observers think American foreign policy is now adrift. The Cold War was expensive. America spent vast amounts of money stationing troops and weapons in Europe and the Far East. Today, we are closing bases and bringing our soldiers home. The Cold War required allies in critical regions: NATO in Europe, Japan, Korea, and the Philippines in the Pacific. Today, many think we should leave regional issues to regional powers. Finally, the Cold War required active diplomacy, foreign aid to third world countries, Radio Free Europe and the Voice of America to spread democratic ideas, a strong American presence at the United Nations. Today, America is cutting back its foreign agencies. In a new and controversial book, our panelist Joshua Muravchik calls all this neo-isolationism. He says he has a better way to go. Joshua Muravchik, my colleague, what is your problem?
Well, my alarm is that with the Cold War having ended, there's a tremendous urge in this country to take a vacation from foreign policy. Congressman Barney Frank put it, it's time to be nicer to ourselves. But the world remains a very perilous place, and I think that if we turn our back on foreign policy, we'll very soon find ourselves with some major new threats or crises that we'll have to deal with in a painful and expensive way.
Okay. Owen Harries, what do you think of Josh's statement?
Well,
and you've read his book, I know.
Yes, but put in that moderate way, I've little complaint with it, but that's not how it comes through in the book. It's a very assertive demand that America lead across the board, that it be a global leader, that it be the teacher, the sheriff, the leader of the posse, the mediator everywhere in a very undiscriminating, unselective way. If I'd sum up my complaint with Josh in Isaiah Berlin terms. He's a hedgehog in a world that is increasingly foxy.
We will come back to that to figure out exactly what that means. Bill Maynes.
Well, I think there is room for retrenchment from the Cold War postures that we had, but not retreat. And so, like Owen, when I listened to Joshua's presentation of his position, I would agree with that as well. I think the question is how engaged, how we spend our money. Right now we're making, I think, many of the wrong choices in the way that we're allocating our international budget.
Okay, in New York, Dick Holbrooke, you have, of this panel, been most recently on the ground in a heroic role in Bosnia. How do you see it?
You know, the end of the Cold War did not mean, as was famously and fatuously said, the end of history. And Josh is absolutely correct that the world is a more complicated and difficult place. Some retrenchment may be necessary. I had no problem with reducing the forces in Germany, but It was only when the United States and the Europeans finally got their act together after 4 terrible years, 1991 to 1995, that we were able to stop the war in Bosnia. It required NATO air power, American diplomatic, political, and military leadership, and I think it's a model for the future. The events in the NATO ministerial meetings in Berlin show again that NATO has a role. The Americans must take a leadership role. We don't want to be a policeman of the world, as Owen says, Ben, but we have a major role in the world, and isolationism would be destructive to our own economic and national interests.
Okay. Josh, you have been characterized as speaking less vigorously than your book speaks. Is that correct?
Well, give me time. I'll
okay.
get it all out. Everyone has said that there's room for some retrenchment. Bill said it, and others agree. Of course, there's room for retrenchment, but the reality is we've done more than retrench already. In the first 5 budgets after the Cold War, we cut defense spending by $350 billion. That's an awful lot of retrenchment. We've cut back our diplomatic budget so that we've closed between 2 and 3 dozen embassies and consulates around the world. We've radically reduced the hours of broadcasting around the world on VOA and Radio Free Europe. We've cut foreign aid very drastically. So we've done a lot more than retrench, and there's no sign that we're stopping. We're just cutting back because we've got a big budget problem that really has nothing to do with foreign policy. It has to do with an imbalance between entitlements on the one hand, which are going up, and taxes which aren't going up or with them or coming down. Those two are out of balance, and we've been trying to postpone the reckoning on our entitlements problem in the budget by just slashing foreign policy accounts across the board relentlessly, and we're going to get into trouble.
You agree with that, Dick?
Of course I do. Look, Ben, let's talk about what's happened. At the end of the Cold War, Americans said enough. We want domestic priorities. That was a legitimate decision. It happened in 1920 and 1945 as well, but it went too far, and the consequences were most evident in Bosnia, but elsewhere in the world. We have a world leadership role now as much as ever, and we want the Europeans and leading Asian countries to be our partners. But this closing of embassies and consulates, I personally fought like hell against it, but I lost some big ones. So, of course, at that level, I agree completely with Josh.
Yes, well, can I break in and try to disturb this harmony a little bit and ask Josh a question? A few minutes ago, Dick said that he certainly didn't believe that America should be the policeman of the world. Do you think America should be the policeman of the world, and don't you virtually say that it should in your book?
Well, in a sense, I say it should be more than the policeman of the world, because a policeman is a hired hand that takes his orders from a mayor or a city council. And in the community of nations, there's no mayor or city council, there's no one to give orders. So we have to do more than be the policeman. We have to be the leader of the world. We have to be the ones who are shaping the decisions about where military might needs to be applied.
I think Josh's abstract theory is exactly proved by what happened in Bosnia. In 1991, the European community, as it was then called, came to the Bush administration and said, we'll take care of Yugoslavia, it's in our backyard. The Bush administration, riding high after the defeat of Saddam Hussein, said, fine. It took us 4 years and 2 administrations to untrack from that. And it was only when the Clinton administration pressed the Europeans and insisted on NATO air power and an all-out diplomatic effort that we got anywhere. Now we must share with the Europeans the responsibility for success. I think it's an exact illustration of what Josh is arguing.
All right, Bill, what were you?
Well, I disagree with some of the assertions that Josh has made here. It's true that we've cut defense significantly, but we cut it from the Ronald Reagan highs. In fact, the American defense budget now is at the level of 1980, after the Carter buildup. In other words, it's at a level that it was at when the Soviet Union still existed, when the Warsaw Pact existed, when there were 500,000 Soviet troops in Eastern Europe, more than that, in fact. So that the statement that we've massively cut defense is misleading. The real problem is that we have a very vigorous defense. The United States represents 37% of all military spending in the world. We don't have a real enemy right now. We're unable to use military force in some of the problems that do exist in the world, like Liberia or others, maybe for legitimate reasons, maybe for illegitimate reasons. Meanwhile, we are starving our diplomatic side of the equation. This is what is crippling American foreign policy.
Well,
it is not.
What on earth would happen if America didn't, quote, lead? I mean, what is this, some marching band or something that we need a drum major?
Ben,
isn't there a whole world out there that...
Ben, look, we are in a bizarre set of false choices here. Everyone agrees that our economy is now global and interdependent. You cannot disaggregate your economic policy and your foreign and strategic policy. You cannot make false choices of this sort. So this is empty words, this isolationism. We have no choice. If we want to be a successful nation economically, we have to maintain a worldwide presence.
My philosophical problem with what Josh is saying is to assert that America must lead is to assert that others must follow. To assert that America must lead globally is to assert that everybody else must follow. That's a subordinate relationship. It's a subordinate relationship that is alien to America's basic values, which are egalitarian, which are values of freedom. America should be concerned to spread responsibility, to spread enterprise, to spread initiative throughout the world, to seek cooperative relationships, not subordinate relationships. That, I think, is my basic objection to this unrelenting emphasis in your book on leadership. The world is too diverse. And coming back to Dick's point about Bosnia, the Europeans were feeble in Bosnia precisely because they had 40 years of depending on American leadership and had lost the instinct to act effectively on their own.
Well, they didn't act very effectively on their own 40 years ago either. They haven't acted very effectively on their own any time since 1914, Owen. And why that is something we can speculate about. But when you say a subordinate position, let's unpack that a little bit. The United States is not an imperial power. We don't suppress anybody. We don't conquer anybody. We don't absorb anybody. But we are by far the mightiest power militarily and also economically. And the fact is that whether you look at Europe, Bosnia, or other situations in Europe in the Cold War, whether you look at Asia with China and Taiwan, or the nuclear threat from North Korea, or the Middle East, wherever you go, the one force that is able to often keep the peace, not always, but often keep the peace or restore it, that the others look to play the leading role is the United States.
But they look to us because thus far we have been willing to play a disproportionate role. And we have deprived them of their own leadership responsibilities. But my question to you is, when you look around the world, I think the count is that of the last 82 conflicts that have taken place in the world, 79 have been internal. So the call right now around the world is for the United States to get involved in situations like Somalia or Bosnia. Josh seems to be asking for a measure of U.S. leadership that would take us into all of those situations.
Dick wants to come. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm really puzzled by the conversation. It's so far afield of the actual challenges we face. First of all, in the first 2 years of this administration, we were criticized in Europe for lack of leadership. Now we're being criticized by people, including Owen, for too much leadership. I'll take the latter charge anytime. Secondly, it isn't the result of creating a dependency over the Cold War period that created Europe's problem. The fact is, the 1991 decision to let Europe handle Yugoslavia was mutually wrong in both Washington and Europe. We are a partnership, Owen, in which we are the senior partner, but it is a true partnership. We're not going to go into all 80-some internal wars, but there are also a lot of unresolved problems in the world where American leadership is key. Let me give you two more examples from current European history, but a legacy of 1919, 1920. All of Southeastern Europe has legacies of unresolved problems. In the last year, the United States has taken the lead in settling Greece-Albanian problems and Hungarian-Slovakian state treaty issues, which now have reduced sharply the chances of conflicts between those two countries. We're actively working on Hungary, Romania. We also settled the Greece problems with the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia. We are working on Cyprus, although it's been very tough. We're trying to work on Romania, Ukraine. Any one of these problems could erupt into a mini Bosnia at some future time.
What we're having here is the sort of extreme notion of American exceptionalism.
No,
The
Owen.
benign, disinterested hegemon,
Owen.
which doesn't want anything for itself, which is just concerned with fixing the world. Now, you know, we spent 40 years talking about and insisting that it's not motives that one must look at, it's capabilities. Look at it from the side of other powers, other countries in the world. That this well-meaning, insisting that it has no interest except to preserve order and peace in the world, but is insisting that its will prevail in virtually every dispute everywhere.
Owen, when you say that for 40 years we said it's not intentions but capabilities, I don't know who you're talking about. I would have never dreamed of saying that. The whole essence of the Cold War was not that the Soviet Union had all these capabilities, but precisely what Soviet intentions were and the nature of the Soviet political system, which was totalitarian and which was aggressive and imperial.
I want to introduce a somewhat different topic here for a moment, and let me direct this to you, Owen. You sort of said a few moments ago that this really isn't the American way to seek a global benign hegemony, to have subordinates. I would make the case that American history is replete with exactly that view. I mean, this is the nation where that phrase manifest destiny, which as a matter of fact kind of went a little too far at some points, but this is where it comes from. This is the country. Ronald Reagan used to always quote John Winthrop, City on the Hill. This country has a messianic streak, and you don't have to scratch very deeply to find it. We think with all our flaws that this is something we want to offer to the world, and we should be prepared to do it somewhat assertively. Therefore, right.
Offer to the world by all means.
Right.
Impose it on the world? No.
No one is imposing
Democracy
it.
is not an export product. It's a do-it-yourself enterprise.
It couldn't
Well,
be more
but there-
false,
but there-
Owen.
but-
Nothing could be more wrong than that. How did Japan get democratic? How did Germany get democratic? How did Italy get democratic? How did Austria?
By being conquered in war and occupied for several years now, do you intend doing that all around the
No,
globe?
but that's only. But that's enough to refute your point that it's something everyone has to do for themselves. And if you go around the world, other places, you see democracy in a lot of places where it's come by virtue, in part, of American influence, American example, American diplomatic pressure, and that's not a violent imposition of our ways, but it's an exercise of leadership,
Bill.
which.
There's always been a debate in American history as to whether we should impose our views on others or whether, by our example, we should make the American experiment so attractive that others would embrace it. And this has been an intellectual debate that has raged for 150 years. I think the problem with the position that you seem to be taking is that while it might work in this case or that case, it is also going to get the United States in an enormous amount of difficulty in some other areas. It's precisely that kind of messianic attitude that carried us into Vietnam.
Well, Bill, I think you're posing a false dichotomy when you say the choice is between imposing our way and just being a model. There's a lot of room in between.
Isn't this the argument between you all, whether we should have an ad hoc foreign policy, case by case, or should we have a theoretical foreign policy, a grand rubric, and then make things fit as much as we can into that? Is that the argument that we're hearing here?
That's part of the argument. That's what I meant by hedgehogs in a foxy world.
Oh yeah, tell us what that means. Hedgehogs in a foxy world.
Hedgehogs are people who know one big thing, who see who look for a unifying principle or impose a unifying principle on reality.
Josh is a hedgehog.
Yeah.
Right.
The foxes are the ones who know many things or who come to terms with diversity and recognize that there ain't one grand unifying
So
principle.
you, Owen Harries, and you, Bill Maynes, are foxes.
I think so.
We hope so.
Yeah. Now, where are you, Dick Holbrooke? Are you ahead?
I think Owen, with all due respect, has got it exactly wrong. The American foreign policy is going to have to be foxy in a hedgehog world, in one sense. All right, the Cold War's over, but instability, whether it's in the Pacific or southeastern Europe or Iraq, Turkey, Iran, which is going to be our next powder keg, has got to require individual, tailored responses, but within a strategic vision. That's the hedgehog part of the argument. The fox part of the approach is you tailor it to the situation.
The problem is not how policymakers deal with this. The issue is how these questions are presented to the American people. And one of the reasons for a hedgehog approach to foreign policy is to try to convey some kind of vision that people can rally around. So even though I have disagreements with him, what he's trying to do is important. I mean, whether or not the policymakers are
You are pro vision, but your vision is an ad hoc approach.
I think it's important.
Instrumental vision.
Yeah, I think it's important for every administration to come up with some kind of concept of how the world works that they can present.
Okay,
to the American people.
I am making you President Maynes. Congratulations. You've just been elected. It's your inaugural address. I'm giving you one paragraph to give me the concept that you think ought to be the American guiding concept.
Well,
Mr. President.
I think that the United States should be working for a concert of great powers, and that the role of the United States is that of a responsible steward of the international system right now.
Owen Harries.
I'm against vision, and I think the time has come to try to educate the American electorate not to expect vision, that it creates more problems, except in certain circumstances, exceptional ones like the Cold War one. I also would point out that if you want to downsize central government, if you want to decentralize power in America, that is incompatible with insisting on a very assertive, proactive, to use that awful word, foreign policy, where America intervenes all over the place and assumes leadership roles on virtually every issue.
In New York, President Holbrooke, does that have a nice ring?
I'm a vice chairman, actually, at an
Okay.
investment bank.
Okay.
We have a foreign policy. It needs to have a vision and values. Now, the fall of 1995 and 1996 were a turning point in American foreign policy. I would say, Ben, that the post-Cold War era ended at Dayton, and we are now in something that I would call the post-Cold War era. Perhaps you can think of a better and sexier phrase.
The post-Cold War.
Post-Cold War era.
I'm just trying to figure out if it fits on a bumper sticker. But,
I'm hoping that you'll come up with a better phrase than that. But the point is that that history will write the period as a seminal period in American foreign policy, but historians will know how this movie came out.
Okay.
And they will decide whether Dayton was the high water mark of American good intentions, which would be a tragedy, or the beginning of our return to the kind of global leadership which is necessary.
President Muravchik.
When the Cold War ended, it's as if we inherited a windfall of security. And the choice we face now is whether to spend that off by ignoring foreign policy or to invest that extra security and strength we now enjoy to try to make the world more peaceful and secure for ourselves and in general for the long run. To do that, what we need to do is keep up our military strength, which discourages a lot of mischief around the world. Be willing to take a very harsh stand against aggressions across borders, such as in Iraq and Kuwait and Serbia and Bosnia. We need to promote democracy around the globe, which makes it more peaceful, and we need to promote free trade, which offers poor countries a means through export to lift themselves out of poverty.
Okay, my own inaugural address would carry my bumper sticker, which is Neo-Manifest Destinarianism, which you can all write in to find out about. We thank you all. Thank you, Joshua Muravchik, Bill Maynes in New York, Richard Holbrooke, and Owen Harries. And thank you. Please send your comments and questions to New River Media, 1150 17th Street Northwest, Washington, D.C. 20036, or we can be reached by email at thinktv@aol.com or on the World Wide Web at www.thinktank.com. For Think Tank, I'm Ben Wattenberg.
This has been a production of BJW Incorporated in association with New River Media, which are solely responsible for its content.